Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Pitchmasters with me, your host, Danny Fontaine. And this week I interview Gina Balarin. Now, Gina is an author, she's a TEDx speaker, and she is a trusted advisor to tech leaders. She was also once a magician's assistant, which obviously I was super intrigued about and asked her a number of questions on. But anyway, Gina shares her insights on the power of storytelling and language in communication. Obviously, one of my favorite topics. We also talk about the importance of emotional connection and a new one, the art of misdirection in presentations and how to turn disbelievers into believers. We cover the whole nature of what it means to actually pitch, as well as nerves and authenticity in leadership. That's a lot of stuff. Now, if you haven't already got a copy, my book, Pitch: How to Captivate and Convince Any Audience on the Planet, is available globally in bookstores, soon to be coming out in Spanish as well, which is very exciting. So pick up a copy if you want an end-to-end guide on everything you need to know about pitching. If you like the episode, if you like this show, I would love it if you would subscribe, like, share, follow, whatever it is you do on social media, and then you will never miss an episode again. And there will be more every 2 weeks. I've got some phenomenal guests lined up for you. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Gina. So if you're ready, please sit back, relax, and get ready to take some notes. Gina Balarin, how are you?
I am very well, thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, having you here all the way from the other side of the world in Australia. I am very much looking forward to this conversation. And the first question I ask all my guests is, if people haven't heard of you, how do you pitch yourself?
Imagine if you were standing in front of people and you were so nervous you were shaking in your boots. And now imagine if there was a secret weapon that you had, and by using that secret weapon, you could be extraordinary. I am that secret weapon.
That is one of the best that I've heard. That is
I
one
just
of the
made it
best.
up on the spur of the moment. I probably shouldn't
Wow, you
confess
should
that.
use that. You should use that. You are the secret weapon. That is amazing. Now, we're going to come on to what that really means shortly, because I'd like to know all of the secrets behind the secret weapon. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit. You know, you've written books, you help CEOs, you've done TED Talks, you're this super influential expert in the world in this stuff. Whether you like it or not, you are.
Okay, if you say so, it must be true.
Exactly. But how did you get to where you are today? And normally I ask people about, around age 20, what was your kind of path? But I'd like you to go a little bit further back, because there's one thing in particular that I hope you're going to mention.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's start at the beginning. If you ask, how did I get into storytelling? The story that I love to tell the most is when I was barely walking and talking and I was literally playing with my dolls.
Yeah.
My mum came into my bedroom, frantic. She was like, Gina, what's wrong? And I looked at her with great surprise and said, what do you mean, what's wrong? She said, but you were crying. That wasn't me, Mum. That was my dolls. So I have been a storyteller and a performer and an actress, if you want to think about it that way. I do have a degree in drama for my sins. Since I could barely walk and talk, because for me, understanding that stories are part of our DNA was actually part of empowering the people around me to make sense of their world, but also just pure entertainment. And I grew up in a house where some people in South Africa, where I grew up, was a kind of a Judeo-Christian upbringing. You'd have a Bible in the table. We had a dictionary.
Wow. Did you used to just read the dictionary?
No, not exactly. Occasionally I would just for fun. I'm not like one of those obsessive people who's literally gone through every word in the dictionary.
Yeah.
But the number of times I would say, Mum, what does that word mean? And she'd be like, look it up in the dictionary, Gina.
So that was your childhood. How did that translate into the career? What was
Well,
your journey?
it was an interesting journey because I think, like a lot of people who are searching for the thing that really makes them come alive, it's taken a lot of different chapters in a lot of different places. So I was a marketer before I knew I was a marketer at an academic organization where I studied and did my master's degree in South Africa. And then I moved to the UK. And then I was doing marketing, but I still didn't really know what it was. So I trained and studied through the Chartered Institute of Marketing. And then I was like, oh, so this is what this marketing thing is. And I'm doing some of this, but I'm not doing all of this. And then I stepped into proper marketing roles as a marketing director. And then I was like, okay, so I've done this now, but really, I have always been a marketer, but actually I'm interested in communication and in stories and in how do people turn their passion into a way that is influential. I was talking to someone earlier today and realized that one of the few books I kept from my undergraduate degree, which was a study of linguistics and English language. So I've always been obsessed with the language and how do we use it and play with it. It was Norman Fairclough's book, Language and Power.
I have not read that one.
And it's fascinating to come back to it. It's kind of almost got a Marxist bent to it about how people manipulate language in order to control power.
Interesting.
But it's, it's a student textbook at the end of the day. So you can like read it fairly easily. But it sat so deeply with me, that idea that masters of language can also be masters of emotion, and therefore masters of destiny. Isn't that a beautiful way to think about literally the sentences that come out of your mouth? That you could be a master of someone's destiny by creating an influential speech?
Wow. I'm making some notes because I want to revisit lots of this.
You're brilliant. So, while you make the notes on that, I mean, think about the speeches that changed the world. Think about Martin Luther King. He stood up and he had us, and there are only a few lines that we remember from that speech, but they changed the world. You think about Winston Churchill, we shall fight on the sands, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall never surrender. You can hear the intonation patterns in his voice too, that escalating tone that builds you up. Almost, in fact, I have shivers on my arms just repeating it. I have a dream! Martin Luther King.
Exactly.
Yeah. You can't not be moved. And part of the reason you can't not be moved when people express this intense emotion when they're communicating is because of the mirror neurons in our brains. When we hear stories, we, believe it or not, cannot identify in our brains the difference between someone telling a story and it actually happening to us in real life.
That's how we can transfer emotion from ourselves to an audience.
Exactly.
And it's all about emotion, really. I mean, a lot of what I look at is the psychology of persuasion. And there's lots of different ways that we can persuade people, but it's that emotional connection that I know you're certainly passionate about that we can make. And the way that you talk about doing that with language specifically is fascinating. Now, just before we go on to that in a bit more depth, the thing I was hoping you would mention is that you were a magician's assistant.
Oh, you see, now I dropped that in just for fun. I don't know that it significantly influenced my career path. But the stage performance is an art. And the irony is that while I wasn't a great actress, I will admit, I can nail the emotions. I can't remember the lines. So that was never going to be a career path for me.
Yeah.
But being on the stage lights up a part of me that creates this connection, or this emotional connection between me and the audience. And I don't know if you've ever been in a performance or you've watched a play or you've just listened to some music where for a moment, everything else stops. Nothing else exists but you and that moment of perfect connection. And for me, being on stage is about that moment of perfect connection. So I've been on stage since I was a tiny little girl as a ballerina. Literally, there's a reason they call me Gina Ballerina. It's not just because my surname is Balarin. It's actually because
Right.
I own the point shoes. I got the blisters. I've done my
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But it's also because when you learn to communicate without words, then words become the icing on the cake.
What magic tricks were you involved in?
Okay, so I can't really tell you about how they worked because I
No, of
am,
course not.
as a former magician's
Sacred
assistant,
oath.
sworn to secrecy.
Yes. Yeah.
But I did have flaming swords stuck through me.
Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And were you ever nervous when you were a kid? Or I don't know how old you were doing this stuff, but you said you'd been on stage since you were a kid.
Yeah. No, I was a magician's assistant when I was in my late teens. To be honest, I was dating the magician, which is why I was the magician's assistant. Which is why it's like an interesting interlude, but it's not necessarily a life path that I want to. Was I ever nervous? No, of course not. The only thing that you're nervous about is whether you're going to screw up the trick because you know how it works. But the fascinating thing about the art of magic is misdirection.
Yes.
And so that is the real fascination behind it. The vast majority, in fact, almost all of magic is about just knowing how to do it in a way that is more advanced than your audience can immediately figure out. There was a quote, I can't remember who it's from, which said, any technology that is sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic.
Right.
So if you think about it, the whole art of magic is to make something just a little bit advanced so you can't figure it out.
Now, in a way, it's I guess you could call it manipulation, but the audience are aware they're being manipulated, so it's not seen as a negative thing. But
Yeah,
can
they're
we
buying
use
into the fantasy. Yeah.
exactly? Is there anything from a magician's standpoint around misdirection that we could use in a positive way when we're presenting or pitching?
Yes, very much so. One of the elements is polish. So a good magician will not just know the art and the science of the trick. They will rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. I'm going to stop repeating that because I could do it all episode and it still wouldn't be enough. But if I think about the connections between performance, presentation, communication, and power, if you are delivering a TEDx talk, you need to rehearse 50 hours for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So as a magician, you have that exact knowledge of what's going to happen in the second. You also have a knowledge of the emotions of your audience. You can spot the disbeliever at the back of the audience, so you know how to direct the attention away from the disbeliever towards the people who are active and engaged, or even better, turn the disbeliever into a believer because your magic is so far advanced that they can't figure out how the trick is done.
In terms of spotting the disbeliever, so this is directly related to a pitch. If we're in a boardroom, sometimes there are one or more disbelievers, and it can be quite obvious. And unlike a magician, we don't really want to ignore the disbeliever because they could be the key decision maker. So what are the sorts of things we can employ to turn a disbeliever into a believer?
Well, I'm going to part answer this question and then actually get your opinion on this as well. My gut instinct is to firstly observe their body language intensely because you're getting a lot more information from their body language than you could if you didn't pay attention. As humans, we are so wired for those subtle nuances, those micro expressions. The second part is to decide whether it's appropriate to call out their disbelief or not. Often, the disbeliever is disbelieving a part of what you're saying, but not all of what you're saying. If you've ever had an argument with someone, I know it's possible to have an argument with one of my best friends because we agree on 95% of the sentence, but we disagree on 5% of that sentence. And that happens in boardrooms too. People are giving you body language where they're like, oh, I don't agree, or, oh, this feels wrong. But actually, they're only hooked up on that 5% of what you said. And so if you can call out their language, it doesn't have to be an aggressive thing. I'll do this in coaching all the time, say to people, okay, your body language changed there. what
Yeah.
happened. And some of the best negotiators will observe that behavior and they'll turn it into a strength. But one of the other things you can do is realize that some people have body language that they cannot control that gives you a deliberately negative response, and they don't even know they're doing it.
Yeah.
Think about resting bitch face.
Yeah.
I saw this wonderful woman talking about body language. She's an expert in it because she had to realize how to overcome her own resting bitch face.
Wow.
And what happens is that you and I are kind of gregarious people. You know, our eyes are a little bit twinkly. We've got a smile. We're warm and friendly. Well, imagine if your face was naturally like this.
Yeah, because you were born that way.
So you were born that way. So if your face is naturally like this, people think you're much more serious. You're going to be sitting in a boardroom doing a natural expression. They think you're negative.
Yeah.
It's probably served you well as a woman in a position of authority because you're not exuding too much warmth. And we can talk about the balance of strength and warmth and how that has a significant impact on communication skills and how people perceive you. But in that context, if you're erring on the side of strength unintentionally, you probably want to understand why people respond to you with such confusion and even sometimes aggression because it's your face.
And if you're listening to the audio version, we've got wonderful faces from Gina going on the video.
Yes, if you can hear me and not see me, just imagine your best version of resting bitch face. But to describe it for the audio only, effectively the corners of your mouth, instead of going up as they would in a smile, the corners of your mouth actually go down. So it looks like you're expressing not just dissatisfaction, but actually, I think one of the micro expressions is, and this is one of the components of the micro expression of disgust, that actually when you express disgust, the corners of your mouth go down. So you can imagine the visceral response someone is going to have to you if they perceive that you are disgusted.
There you go. Now, again, there's lots of things I want to probably come back to. One of them is women specifically in authority, but I've made a note on that one. But before we go more into that, let's answer this question, because you work with a lot of leaders, but you don't coach them specifically on going into a pitch. You coach them on lots of different things. So in your opinion, what is a pitch? When are we pitching and when are we not?
That's such a lovely question. I'm going to give you an answer that isn't mine. It's actually from Daniel Pink, because one of the most influential books I remember reading was called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And the principle behind it was that we are always selling, or to use your language, we are always pitching. So if you think about, are you trying to convince your kids to unpack the dishwasher? You're pitching to them.
Yeah.
Are you trying to get a job? You're pitching for the job. Are you trying to get a new client? You're pitching for the client. Are you trying to win the hearts and minds of your audience? You're pitching to your audience. But I don't know, what's your definition? Maybe I'm missing something there.
No, I don't think you're missing anything. Big fan of Daniel Pink. To Sell is Human was the big book for me, where he talks about that stuff as well.
So but you're right, it wasn't Drive. My apologies. It was actually To Sell is Human, not Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates
Drive
People.
Is brilliant
My
as well.
apologies. Yeah.
Oh, no need to apologize. So I agree. I agree wholeheartedly that basically we're pretty much always pitching all of the time. Do you think that so I think that's a fact, but could it also change our mindset if we think, well, I'm going into this meeting, oh, I'm actually doing a pitch? Do you think that changes how people might feel and also about how they might do things a little differently?
It's a really good question. And I actually try to coach my clients not to say that's a really good question, because it's a cop-out. It finds people a way to answer the question. But it was a really good question.
Genuine good question.
Let's go back to this. The question was, if people are going into a significant meeting and they perceive it as a pitch, does it influence their behavior? The answer, of course, is yes. If you perceive anything that you're doing in a communication scenario as something that you're pitching, i.e. there's a win or a loss consequence for what you're saying, your behavior is going to change. The question is whether your behavior is going to change in a positive or a negative way. So if we work on the assumption that you are the kind of person who is driven by challenge, and just as an aside, if you have ADHD, often you're motivated by only 4 things: interest, novelty, challenge, and urgency. So if you are anywhere on the ADHD spectrum, you might find that introducing challenge into your communication can enhance your performance. So if you are the kind of person who believes that challenge enhances your performance, then thinking, I am pitching this, could give you those enabling nerves that help you to nail that performance, because you have just that little bit more adrenaline that gets you going and therefore gives you that edge. However, on the flip side, if you're the kind of person who absolutely crumbles under pressure, and I don't believe the stat, but it's commonly thrown about that 75% of people actually have a fear of public speaking.
Yeah.
The stat is wildly taken out of context. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people have a fear of public speaking. If you perceive that you're doing a pitch and that the stakes are high, and you go into a communication context where there's going to be a win or a loss, then the chances are you're going to make yourself more nervous and your performance will suffer as a result. And what happens then is, instead of having enabling nerves, you get debilitating nerves. Now, this is an interesting aside. Let's talk about enabling nerves and debilitating nerves. Have you ever had that feeling in the pit of your stomach, which feels like butterflies?
Yes.
So butterflies can actually be perceived as both positive or negative. And if you are the kind of person who sees the butterflies as an enhancement, you are likely to get enabling nerves. If you see those butterflies as a bad thing, you're likely to get debilitating nerves. And what happens then is you can actually try to fake your brain. And if you're going, oh, I've got these butterflies, I'm so nervous, I'm going to do so poorly. And you think, actually, hang on, these butterflies are giving me doses of adrenaline. They're helping me up my game. They're giving me all of this boost that I need to be the best version of myself. You can actually flip your nerves so that you start to see them as a good thing rather than as a bad thing.
It's interesting. I've never heard the phrase enabling nerves. It makes perfect sense, but lots of people come on the show and we talk about, how do you calm nerves? How do you get rid of nerves?
Yeah.
How, nerves are bad. And I've heard of this flip in mindset to make them feel a little better, at least. But sometimes, by what you're saying, we might not be nervous enough, which is an interesting
Absolutely. Now,
concept.
this is an interesting one because I work with a fair number of senior executives, high-powered people who need that challenge. So sometimes the problem is that they're so bored with doing the same presentations again and again and again that they give a mediocre performance because they're not challenged enough. Can I share a story about me and my own experience of enabling nerves? It comes back to my stage performance days in Gina
Please
Balarin.
do. Yeah.
So the first time I realized that I am fortunate to get, in the context of speaking and performance, enabling nerves was when I was performing on stage as Cinderella. I think I was 11 years old at the time. And I was dressed in my ballet outfit with fake Cinderella rags, and I had a broom in my hand, and I had my little golden slipper hidden in my pocket, and I danced around the stage, picking up the golden slipper and remembering my dance with the prince the night before. But as I was standing on that stage in front of the audience, I stood there with the broom handle clasped in both my hands, and I could feel myself shaking.
Right.
You couldn't see the broom from the stage. You couldn't see the shakes from the stage.
Yeah.
But I gave what was one of the most memorable performances of my entire life. Because in that moment, those butterflies gave me this ability to transform myself into Cinderella.
Wow. Funnily enough, one of the first things that I ever did that made me incredibly nervous was being Prince Charming in Cinderella when I was 11 years old at the end of primary school. So there
Could
you
have
go.
danced together.
We could have done it together. Maybe we'll give it a go. I can't remember the lines anymore though. But
Well, see, now I didn't have to worry
interestingly,
about lines. I was just
well,
dancing, so
no.
it was easier for me.
But that sort of brings me on to another point. Now, the reason I was so nervous, aged 11, and this is breaking news. No one on the podcast has ever heard about me being in Cinderella aged 11 before. I was mainly nervous because I had all of these lines in my head and I'd rehearsed them all summer, but I was just so scared that I was going to forget a line on stage. And I think that's one of the things that presenters get nervous about too.
Yeah, it's a very common experience. And part of the training of me as your secret weapon is to actually rehearse mistakes.
Okay. How do you rehearse a mistake?
Well, what you do is you work through it with the person who's on the call with you or in person doing training. I do most of my training online.
Mhm.
And when you make the mistake, they stop you. And then they create an interrupt process to be able to say, what happened there? Where did your brain go? What did you think the consequences were? Right, now let's step back. If this happens, here's what you can do instead. So you actually start to realize that making a mistake is not the problem that you think it is. And a
Yeah.
lot of the coaching that you need to be able to go through in order to improve your performance is not learning things off by heart.
Right.
It is
Right.
about finding alternative ways of getting your point across so that it comes across as natural and it comes across as authentic, valuable, validated, trustworthy, often filled with interesting stats if you can get them and they're relevant, but not like you're reading from a script. I'll give you an example. Okay, so I'm picking up a copy of my book now for those listening in on audio called The Secret Army, Leadership, Marketing, and the Power of People. I'm picking a random page, and I'm doing this so that I can illustrate the difference between the vast majority of people who read from a script and what you do when you learn the art of performance, as you would as an actor, instead of as a speaker. Chapter 11, Undiscovered Idea Generators. What do bananas have to do with expenses? This chapter answers that question and explains why your expectations of non-creative types are wrong, how vast amounts of information enable faster idea creation and vetting, and why undiscovered idea generators are today's equivalent of explorers and inventors. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Sounds pretty good, but I see where you're going with this, because if that's how you did it on stage, I would think you were about as exciting as a piece of wood.
But it gets worse. Chapter 11, Undiscovered Idea Generators. What do bananas have to do with expenses?
Stop.
This chapter answers that question and explains why your expectations of non-creative types are wrong. Okay, you get the point.
Yeah.
Okay. So this was harder for me because I've not read that chapter for many, many months, maybe even years. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't have it perfectly available. It was a very long sentence. I couldn't deliver a perfect performance.
Yeah.
But unless you are trained in the art of beautiful reading,
Right.
the performance that you're going to give when reading from a script will always be less impressive than the performance you'll get if you just speak like a human.
And the other major benefit of not using a script is that, or the other major enabler that people forget about is that the audience doesn't know what's in the script. So if you miss out an entire chapter, well, the audience doesn't know that. And people stop and they go, oh no, what was I going to say here? I can't remember. And you think, well, it doesn't matter. Just don't, just carry on, because you are the magician.
There you go. You've already exposed one of the deep secrets of being a great presenter. Nobody knows what's written on your piece of paper.
Right.
Nobody knows what you were planning to say. And quite frankly, if you forget what you were going to say, it really doesn't matter. I'll tell you what does matter, though. How your audience feels when you're done.
Yes. So I'm going to come on to that as a topic, but I just want to stick on board executives for a second, because you've piqued my interest on this enabling nerves. How do you get an executive excited who's lost their excitement and they've lost all of their nerves as well because they're doing the same thing day in, day out?
Okay, that is an easy question to answer. The way to get people who are senior but bored with what they're doing excited is by helping them rediscover their spark.
Okay.
And it is a beautiful journey, but it is not something that you can do academically. You can't rediscover your spark by reading it away. You can't rediscover your spark often by talking about it with people within your organization. What it requires is a reframing and a rethinking of why you do what you do and why it matters. I have been able to bring executives that spark again. And often it has to do with them getting out of their own head and out of their own way. And one of the best ways of doing that is by focusing on your customers instead. To rediscover your spark, it really helps to identify that excitement that you have about helping customers. Because when you can tell a customer's story, especially a real customer story, especially a customer story where what you've done, your product or service, has made a genuine difference in their life or their organization or their future path, how can you not be excited about it?
Yeah.
One of the best examples I had was working with a guy who had sold his company to another organization, was put into one of the senior director roles, and they came to me and they said, "Oh, Gina, you're going to have your work cut out for him. You know, he's hard work." And actually what we realized is that he just lost his spark.
Right.
And we worked together to help him rediscover it. And he was the best performer at the entire event because he remembered why he did what he did. He remembered what gave him joy and delight, and that translated immediately to the audience. But it went even further because we carried on working together after just preparing him for a panel discussion. That was the brief at the time. We carried on working together until we could actually help him translate that spark into other aspects of his life. Because communication is forever.
Yeah.
We tend to think that a sentence that we utter may be meaningful in that moment in time. And it is. But sometimes the way, the attitude you have to that sentence and the way it influences other people and the behavior patterns you get into when you say that thing again and again can be incredibly detrimental to relationships. What we were able to do was help him identify his spark and his negative behavior patterns and change them. And the best compliment I ever got was, "Hey, Gina, my wife says thank you."
That is something. That is something. Communication is forever. I love that. Now, one of the things you said was that the joy of this person transferred into the audience. So that brings us back onto this path of eliciting emotion. Now, you talked about mirror neurons and we talked about having joy, but can we get into it a bit more? Because I think what are the different ways we can use to actually create that emotion from another human being by what we are doing?
Highly intense emotions translate very well when you're telling stories. Often we think about love, we think about joy, we think about passion, positive emotions. Yes, those will obviously transfer information and they will transfer emotion, but they tend to be very overused. And the risk when you're delivering any kind of performance, whether that's a presentation, a panel discussion, or even a one-to-one conversation with a member of your team that you have to persuade to do something or not do something, what we forget is that negative emotions actually carry enormous power. Now, marketers obviously know the psychology of telling people not to do something so that they will, or making them afraid of something so that they don't do it, or making them angry about something so that they do it. But I'll never forget this illustration that really helped me understand the power of emotion, and especially in storytelling and especially in imagery. I was attending a conference, a marketing conference, where a graphic designer had this incredible deck, and he was talking about strong, intense emotions and how audiences react to them. And he showed me a picture of a high heel, a 3-inch stiletto heel, and a person's hand underneath the heel.
Oi.
Exactly. For the audience, you can imagine the pain of someone sticking that stiletto through the fleshy part of your hand and the pain that is associated with that. And this is the thing that we use because it has great power with great care, because emotions can be incredibly manipulative if they're not used carefully.
Yeah.
But they also can be woven very cleverly into a journey. What a lot of people forget is that any communication is a journey. And with storytelling, you can start the story at the end, or you can start the story at the beginning, or you can start at the end and then go back to the beginning and then tell it all the way to the end so that all of a sudden the end makes sense. Well, that moment in time when you introduce the pain of that high heel stiletto going into that person's hand can be used with varying effects depending on where you put it and what emotional response you want. And if you think about a story arc as having moments of drama and moments of trauma and moments of personal growth, the real art is being able to take the listener through that journey. Because if I talk like this the whole way through a presentation, I will lose my audience because nobody cares what I have to say. If I talk like this all the time, then people are going to be very emotive and also very frustrated because I can't stop.
Yeah.
But if I lower my voice and then increase the drama and the tension and tell you something really important, and then lower my voice again, all of a sudden I've created an emotional journey.
Yeah. And I think what people forget's the wrong word. I think what people are reluctant to do, certainly in a business setting, is to introduce those moments of trauma, which means all they're doing is a flat line. And even if it's joyful, it becomes boring because stories are not compelling without that contrast and conflict. And so with that in mind, there are tons of storytelling frameworks out there. Is there one or two in particular that are your go-to, especially when you're coaching other people?
Honestly, there isn't anything specific that springs to mind. I'm a big fan of the put a hero up the tree, throw rocks at him, and then figure out how to get him out of a tree, just generally as a storytelling technique, because it's so incredibly simple. And it really is the entire
could you give an
hero's journey.
example of that as a story?
Okay.
I've never heard that one before. I love it already.
I want to go to the shops on Wednesday, but I've lost my bank card. And then my car breaks down. And then I discover that I can't buy it online because my internet connectivity is down. And then I realize that it's my grandmother's birthday next week and I've forgotten to get her a card and I can't go to the shops because I don't have my bank card and I can't get to the shops because my car is broken and I don't have internet connectivity. I'm the hero. I'm up a tree. You've thrown rocks at me.
Right. Got it. And then we save you.
You save me because you swoop in with an app that I can use on my phone. And you don't even need to have internet connectivity because we will delay your ability to make payment. And you can buy the card online for your grandmother without internet connectivity and we'll even post it to your door. Product problem solved right there.
Yeah, yeah. What are the other ways that we can make a narrative really stand out? So especially if we're in a competitive pitch scenario, which is my field of work, we're often saying very similar things to our competition. So what are your thoughts on that?
Really, you're the expert in this. What stands out for me if you're in a competitive situation with a pitch, I think the idea is to be different, to be noticeable. If we think about some of Seth Godin's original writing, the purple cow was transformational for a very good reason. because the whole idea is that you can look at a field of brown and white cows and you don't even notice them. But if the cow is purple, you will unquestionably stand out. So I suppose the answer to the question, what will make people stand out in a competitive situation, in a pitch, is to say, what's your purple cow? And then how can you make sure that the purple cow that you have is introduced in a way that you don't swallow the strap line, you don't choke on the moment of drama?
Yeah.
I'd say don't be afraid to use the drama.
Yeah. Now, that's something I completely agree with, because the purple cow doesn't even have to be a purple cow in the story you're telling. It can be something in the room. I think what we're really talking about here is anomalies. And especially when we're watching pitches as a procurement person or as a buyer in any position, we get very bored of it,
So bored.
and we expect the same thing. And good news, we get the same thing. And when someone does anything even remotely different with a prop or with a sound or with something, the bar is so low that that one tiny difference is so memorable and can really make us stand out, I think.
It's a beautiful example. I will never forget being a junior marketer at an engineering firm where they were giving us a presentation for a lunch and learn session, and one of the partners of the business had not a single word on his slide deck. This was in the days when this was brand new. He just had imagery. And he spent an hour talking about the projects that he delivered. And it was probably only a picture of a building, followed by a picture of a road, followed by a picture of, I don't know, guys in hard hats. I can't remember exactly. But the point was that those pictures took on a life of their own. And I think sometimes in corporate context, people are a little bit afraid to do something outside of the norm. I mean, we have decks for a reason, right? Everybody wants you to follow the corporate rules, to play to the corporate strengths, and you may get told off for putting a purple cow in, which might be your engineering equivalent of guys in hard hats. But it's worth it. The payoff exceeds the risk in the vast majority of cases, just to be different. One of my clients, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would argue that those corporate rules are only an hour ahead anyway.
Ooh, that's a beautiful philosophical point. Are they? Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. I mean, if you live in really, or if you work in really strong industries with strong compliance and mandatory requirements, and then there are a lot more corporate rules you have to follow. But even in those industries, I think about some of the crazy things that people have done in banking that just completely cuts through the noise. Just because you have to be compliant doesn't mean you have to be boring.
Exactly. And just because it's how everyone else before you has done it doesn't mean we need to do it in the same way either.
Hear, hear.
Right. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
I can't remember.
Something else. Oh, I can't
We'll
remember.
have to edit this bit out because I have no idea where I was going.
Excellent. Right. What should we talk about next? I got some notes. How about I ask you this question? Do you remember being in a pitch presentation, speech, talk where you felt strongly emotional?
Yes. The example of the partner at an engineering firm who shared examples of his work with such great power. I was emotional. And honestly, it transformed the way I saw engineering forever. It meant that I wasn't just a marketer. I was helping people build homes. I wasn't just a marketer. I was an essential component of that bridge that's going to stand for hundreds of years. I wasn't just a marketer. I was helping people prevent floods.
Right.
That was what was so transformational. He had the imagery, but it wasn't about the imagery. It was about his absolute conviction in what he did and why it mattered to the world. So yeah, I was emotional watching that. I want to share another example of emotion, and it's not in a pitch context, but I think the lessons can apply to a pitch context. So we talked about Cinderella as a performance, and the moment when I realized as a ballerina I was Cinderella. And you, of course, were Prince Charming. But I will never forget watching a ballet performance of a different nature. Have you ever heard the music to Romeo and Juliet? Do 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 do, and it carries on. It's building to this crescendo. That's just one of the opening dance scenes. The whole performance is beautifully designed to evoke emotion. Music, of course, evokes emotion very well. If people can use music in presentations, that's a huge transformative experience.
Yeah.
But what was so amazing for me for this performance of Romeo and Juliet, and this is why I come back to the importance of movement, body language, non-verbal communication as being so vital to translating emotion, was the end of the story. Imagine you are in the crypt and Juliet is lying on the bier and it appears for all intents and purposes to be dead. And you are Romeo and you come up to her and your heart is breaking and you pick up her lifeless body and you dance with the body and your heart is breaking and you drink the poison and you fall down with your whole body on the floor holding Juliet's hand. And she wakes up. The tragedy of that moment, the unbearable heartbreak, the poignancy transcends words.
Yeah.
And it's one of the oldest stories ever told because the emotional intensity of tragedy is so powerful. Now, not to cheapen the perspective of tragedy, but it can be used as a technique in storytelling, especially to help people identify if we don't change, things could become this bad. One of the frameworks I really like is the challenger sales methodology.
Yeah.
And they use the format of a warmer, and that's like, hello, we like you, and a reframe. Did you know that this thing is actually different to what you thought it was? An emotional impact. And if you don't fix this thing, it's going to get really bad. And then emotional drowning. And then you're like, if you don't fix it, your world's going to end. But it's okay, because we have a solution that is going to solve all of your problems.
Exactly.
And that gets you to a point where all of a sudden you believe in the solution without anyone having necessarily told you, hey, we're great, we're amazing. You've actually gone through that emotional journey to get there. And I was actually trained as a marketer in an organization where they were doing sales and marketing training in the challenger sales methodology. And I've never forgotten that journey.
And the distinction there is to never be sensational with tragedy. But if there is genuine existential threat to businesses, people, it can be on the table in that way because you're being authentic about what might go wrong without this move.
And I think that plays a role in corporate communications.
Yeah.
When you look at what happens when tragedy really does happen. We avoid tragedy so often in our lives that we're almost not prepared to cope with it when it happens.
Yeah, it's true. Now, we've talked a lot about emotions, and through imagery and through storytelling and through osmosis. But one of the things you said early on in the episode, which I just loved, is that if we can be masters of language, we can be masters of emotion and masters of destiny. So can you talk to me a little bit more specifically about language and how we use it and how that can up the ante for this emotional transfer?
Trying to think if I can think of an example to use. Okay. We're not going to get bonuses paid this year. That can feel like a tragedy to some people.
Mm.
Now, when you have to deliver that message, it's incredibly hard. You can deliver that just as a straight fact. We're not going to get bonuses this year. And you can anticipate the emotional reactions that are going to happen. Or you can preface that with information going, we did everything we could possibly do, and we missed our target by 1%. I know it's heartbreaking. I am heartbroken. I am heartbroken by the effort that we put in to get so close and not achieve our goals. But I believe in you. We will not get our bonuses this year. But I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that this doesn't happen next year.
Stark difference in the messaging there. Yeah. And if someone's saying, well, that's great. You're obviously a natural at this, but I'm not. I'm terrible. Is there some tangible advice about how people can somehow start to get better at using language in a more powerful way?
Yeah, I think we can start by actually looking at the consequences of what we say. And it becomes an observational skill. So if you are having a conversation with someone you've known for a very long time and you say a specific sentence and their emotional response is surprising to you or different to what you expected, then look at what did I just say? And often that helps us go, okay, like I might not remember the exact words, but if I observe this behavior repeating and repeating and repeating itself, then you can start to identify, this particular phrase is a trigger. So I have a friend who I'll have conversations with, and if I use the word no, they explode.
Right.
It might be as simple as, do you want a cup of tea? And I say no. It just is a huge trigger for them.
Wow.
But if they say, do you want a cup of tea? And I go, not right now, thank you. They don't get that emotional trigger.
Interesting.
So we can play with language just by looking at what we say and how people respond to it. It's not as hard as you might think, but it does require observation skills, and it does require the ability to self-analyze and the desire to change. Because quite frankly, if you're using language and you have no desire to change, then you'll probably not be interested enough to remember what you said and to observe the reactions that other people have to it.
Do you think AI can help?
AI can definitely help with the way we communicate, but can it help in a way that enhances our long-term survival or not is a fact that we remain to see. AI has enormous benefits and enormous disadvantages. The risks are immediately obvious. In a marketing context, people think that there is no longer the need for marketing creativity or for marketing communication because they can do it themselves.
Yeah.
There are massive risks to marketers who are being put out of jobs because bots can do their jobs instead. It's not about the skills of the people who can do the jobs, though. It is about a question of how do your audience respond to the jobs that they do? And more importantly, what happens when no one is there to pick up the pieces? So is AI an enabler? Yes. I just had a conversation with an old friend who's an AI expert and a marketer. And he used the analogy of how people use AI in terms of a race. If you're running a marathon, it's 42.2 kilometers, 21 miles. That might not be right with the miles.
26 miles.
26 miles. There you go. You obviously someone who knows something about marathons.
I do miles, not kilometers. I don't know anything
All
about
right. Okay,
marathons.
fine. I'm going to stick with the 42.2 kilometers.
Cool.
You're running a marathon. It is 42.2 kilometers. If you are using AI the way an average person would use AI, you might use it to help you tie your shoelaces faster and give you sports drinks along the route. Okay, so your marathon time will be cut down a little bit. If you're using it a slightly more interesting way, you might find that actually AI has helped you identify a loop in the track that you can just bypass. And so you'll cut off an hour from your time. If you're using AI in an advanced way, you might find that actually you're using a bicycle instead of running a road race. And if you're using something as advanced at the moment as agentic AI, you were creating different versions of humans to run that race for you. That's the equivalent of driving the whole track in a sports car.
Yeah.
So the question is, do we want to drive sports cars? Well, not everyone does. There's the question of ethics. Is it ethical to win a road race by driving a sports car? I don't know, but the fact of the matter is that whether it's ethical or not, people are going to do it. The only question is whether you want to be the person who's tied their shoelaces a little bit faster and had an extra energy drink, or whether you want to be the person who is in the sports car running the race, or maybe somewhere in between. All I know is that if we aren't embracing AI, we will be left behind.
And have you started to notice the difference with the things that you see in either the marketing world or presentations, and you think, I think AI did that, and I think it's better, worse?
It's an ethical conundrum. I've observed others using AI in a way that makes me angry because I spot it and I think, how could you think that I could be fooled by that when it's so obviously AI? But I've also observed AI used as a tool that goes, oh my word, I had no idea that was even possible.
Yeah.
So one example of using AI in a way that makes me really cross is when people have conversations with you and you realize you're not talking to a human being, you're talking to a bot or a script.
Yeah.
That leads to enormous disadvantages and plateaus of disappointment. But on the other side, and this is an area of expertise which I'm not particularly well versed in, creating an entirely new song with 3 or 4 prompts that makes you laugh and cry and feel emotional. And that is AI generated. That is a moment of wowness for me. But what I will say is a lot of it has to do with how cleverly we adapt the technology. And that means not necessarily using the technology before anyone else does, so no one spots that you're using a fake, but about combining different technologies to create innovations in a way that change the way we communicate. It's a fascinating subject, and I think there's a lot of good and bad in it. And I think we can't get away from the risk that if we keep giving the same instructions and keep copying and pasting the content that comes out of it, sooner or later, everything's going to sound the same.
Right. And then it brings on this theory that no one's going to want that garbage anymore. So there will be uprising of humans, complete with mistakes and bad opinions and bad communication and all the rest
And baseball bats.
And baseball bats, exactly.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I can't predict the future. I can say that, like any revolution, whether it was the Industrial Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution or the IT revolution, we're in the midst of an AI revolution, and we are evolving. We have to evolve faster, but the machines are evolving faster than we are. So I don't know. Maybe we will have baseball bats in our future. But one thing is certain, that knowledge is power, but so is language, and so is the ability to command and control how people use language. And the old phrase, never have an argument with a man who buys ink by the barrel, could not be more true today. Because if you are in control of the supply of information, you're almost invincible.
Yeah. Powerful stuff. Who are some of your heroes? Who excites and inspires you from the annals of all time?
I think I have some linguistic heroes that are really beautiful to think about. I had an interesting exploration earlier this year about Winston Churchill, to realize that he wasn't just a great speaker and a great writer. He was a really good rehearser And so I heard the recording of his speech, and it surprised me at the time because he used a very distinctive pattern. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the land. We shall never surrender. And it was the same intonation pattern. It surprised me. But he is a hero in his ability to influence and persuade people in a way that I think changed the destiny of a nation.
Yeah, I agree. What about in marketing? Do you have a marketing hero? Is it Seth?
Is it contentious if I say it's not Seth, that I'm actually
No, not at all.
have very mixed emotions about Seth?
Yeah, not contentious at all. You feel free to elaborate or not.
All right,
on that.
Seth, if you're listening, listen deep here, mate, because Seth Godin is prolific and he produces vast quantities of information. And I'm enough of a fan to read his daily email, I think. Sometimes it's just long and waffling and I'm not interested. And sometimes he has some pithy epiphanies and I'm like, oh, that's great. I'll share that. The reason I'm not a Seth fan is because I get the feeling that he's incredibly good at creating ideas, but also leveraging other people's ideas to curate and put out there in the world.
Yeah.
But I get the feeling, and I hope he's not listening, not that he would be, but you never know.
I think you're
I get the feeling that he has the attention span of a gnat.
Right.
Because he can't stick to anything.
Right.
So I kind of miss that consistency. I crave that consistency. I want to know that he's thinking about something bigger or something better or something amazing. And I don't get that feeling. I used to be a big fan of Dan Pink. I was a bit disappointed with his most recent book. I think it was about time. What was it called? The Science of Perfect Timing.
Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway, it was like he took a whole bunch of ideas about time and shoved it together in one book. And I was like, well, that's not leading me through a journey. That's not taking me anywhere that I have an epiphany as a result of this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, not so much a fan. But I suppose this is the problem, is like never meet your heroes. Because as soon as you get to delve down beneath the surface, you realize that heroes are human like the rest of us. And everyone has flaws and foibles and, no one, the only reason to put someone on a pedestal is so that they reach down and say, hey, do you want to climb up here with me? That's the kind of leader I admire and respect.
Yeah.
I do admire Dan Pink because of what he's doing with standing up and standing out and speaking out and saying controversial things. But, that reminded me of someone, a linguistic hero, someone who I think did an incredible job in a very difficult time, is actually the New Zealand former Prime Minister, Jacinta Ardern.
Okay.
And she speaks up so eloquently for soft power. For the idea that you don't have to be a dictator to get things done. For the idea that it's okay to step into roles that terrify you because it needs to happen. To find the strength in yourself, to be the leader that people need.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard, even when it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a big fan. Jacinta, yeah, she's good in my estimation. We can have arguments about whether she did the right thing for the country in the grand scheme of things. I don't know, but I like the fact that she was a real human at a time of real crisis when the world needed that.
Yeah. So tell people where they can find you and your books and your services. Where do you want to point people towards?
Come talk to me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out. Now, a lot of people forget that you see this, you can't click that immediate connect button. But you can always click the drop-down menu on the right-hand side of Connect so that you can connect with me. And I love to get invitations from people. But please, if you can, and I know not everyone has access to the messages, please, if you can, send me a message and follow up in some way, shape, or form and go, hey, Gina, this is why I want to connect with you, because it makes such a big difference. Like, if words are power, and you have the ability to say something that shows people a little bit of your personality, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah. That's how we met, you and I. That's why we're here today. A little LinkedIn connect and message, and here we are. So there you go. Proof. thank you for your time. But before we finish, do you have any final words of wisdom for the listeners?
If you're in a context where you need to influence someone, think about what is the best version of that outcome rather than what is the worst, and work towards that.
Perfect. Gina, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I've learned a huge amount, and may our LinkedIn connection turn into podcasts, turn into a lifelong friendship.
Thank you. Danny, I am honored to have this chat with you. You've brought out epiphanies that I didn't even realize were there, and that is the art of someone who's really good at pitching, is finding the real nuggets and the gems and helping people realize that those can be transformative.
You have been listening to Pitchmasters with me, your host, Danny Fontaine. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. Do follow, like, share, stay in touch, because I've got plenty more fabulous guests coming up in the near future. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Pitch: How to Captivate and Convince Any Audience on the Planet, from all good bookstores and online all over the world. You can also find me on all the social media channels. Just look for Danny Fontaine or Pitch Guy, and we can carry on the conversation. But until next time, happy pitching.